Wonderful. Welcome. Hello. I'm Meredith Badler. I'm the Deputy Director at the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts, and it is my pleasure to introduce you or to welcome you to tonight's webinar. This is the second webinar in our Own Your Sound, Mastering the Business of Music series. Tonight we are talking all about music publishing. So publishing split sheets, publishing deals, PROs, mechanicals, writer share, publisher share, ASCAP, CMIA, etc. That is what we are covering tonight. We are recording each one of these webinars. So if you missed week one, which covered copyright basics and contracts and previewed a little bit about publishing, that recording is available. And this series is presented by a program of CBCA, Colorado Attorneys for the Arts, as well as the Colorado Music Industry Alliance. And we'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. A few housekeeping items. If you are joining us tonight live, we are on Zoom. We are recording this webinar, so it will also be available later. We have a playlist already started on YouTube where we will be posting all 6 of the webinars in this series. So if you are watching this later, hello to you as well. So glad you could find us. To help with that recording and just keep us all focused on the content, I'm going to ask our participants on tonight to keep yourself on mute unless we're at a Q&A moment. And I also encourage you to keep your camera off. Stay focused on the presentation at hand. And again, there'll be time during Q&A when we can come on screen or unmute ourselves. Folks are already introducing themselves in the chat. I love that. We have folks from all over the state of Colorado, all different elements of our music industry. Say hello, make some connections. We are always about building community here at CBCA and CMIA. Use the chat to ask questions. And I ask you just to be respectful of each other, supporting our shared learning. Feel free to ask questions, even if it feels like a silly question. We welcome silly questions. So yeah, and then we have, again, this is a series of 6 webinars. So if you've liked what you've learned and want to make sure you can enjoy the rest of the series, those are all available for free. You can attend 1 or all 6 of these webinars. And again, watch the recording. I mentioned this series is being co-presented by 2 entities, the CBCA, the Colorado Business Committee for the Arts. We run Colorado Attorneys for the Arts, or CAFTA, as we call it. CAFTA is a legal referral service and education program run through CBCA, all about connecting artists and creative entities across the state with usually pro bono or free legal representation, as well as legal education, like what you're participating in tonight, and consultation. So really making that easy and accessible to help artists in all different disciplines have access to legal knowledge and legal support. And we are partnering with the CMIA, the Colorado Music Industry Alliance, which is a new organization that is really intended to be that centralized hub for our music industry in Colorado. All of those various partners, from individual musicians, venues, our radio stations, all of those various partners across the state. And we have some folks from CMIA on the webinar as well. So we are delighted to bring this series to you. So tonight, as I said, we're talking all about publishing. We are alternating speakers. So our first week 1 was led by Max Haas with Holon Law. And tonight we have the wonderful Dave Ratner with the Creative Law Network. He is also an attorney who focuses in the arts and creative industries, as well as being affiliated with us at CAFTA. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Dave to join us, share his slides. He'll be with us for the rest of tonight's presentation. And again, please share your questions in the chat. I know he's eager to answer them. Take it away,
Indeed.
Dave.
Thanks, Meredith. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And appreciate everybody being here because there's a lot to know. And this series, we've done a lot of presentations that are just kind of like trying to keep all this stuff into an hour or two. Here we really break it out into 6 full weeks. We really do hope that you can participate in all of them because they do kind of build on each other. And that is, so the more of them you see, if you watch 1 and 2, it'll be 3 and 4 will make a lot more sense, so to speak. But if you miss one, come for the next. We won't let you down. As Meredith said, I'm an attorney. I have a law firm called Creative Law Network. We specialize in working with creative people and businesses. And I have been practicing in this area of the law for more years than I probably want to admit. But I always make sure to also qualify that in my prior life, before becoming a lawyer, I was a band manager. Before that, I was a tour manager. Before that, I was a roadie, and the entire time I've been a huge fan. So I basically, in working in music prior to becoming a lawyer, I was on the road with bands, I was representing bands, I was managing bands, and I just realized all my bands need a lawyer, right? And that was really the motivation for me getting involved in the legal side of things, was because I really wanted to be able to help folks from the legal side, because the legal side is important as well. And it can be a little confusing. I have to admit, there are times when the words we use get complicated. The contracts certainly get complicated. Our goal here is just to break it all down, make it as as palatable as possible. And as Meredith said, there are no dumb questions here. So please put your questions in the chat. You don't have to wait until the end. If you put a question there that I'm going to cover in a few slides, I will let you know or just pass on it. But I don't want to miss anything. So if you have a question, pop it in there. Chances are someone else is thinking the same thing. Someone else has the same question. We got a lot of different people here. I know we got a lot of artists in the room, also managers, a few lawyers. And so most of the perspective I offer this from is from the artist perspective, because I think that is a good way to conceptualize things, but everybody has a right to be here. And so we will be answering the questions from all different sides. So real quick, we'll talk about just kind of what the agenda is going to be here. As Meredith said, we've got split sheets, publishing deals, PROs, mechanicals, writer share, publisher share, ASCAP, BMI, MLC. It's a lot, right? But we're also throwing a lot of terms at you. And I think part of the goal here today is to explain these terms. Okay, so and there's kind of a natural progression to these things, or at least we're going to try and present it that way. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just review some copyright basics. I know a lot of you were here last week when Max went over this. All the stuff about the copyright basics really applies here because we're really talking about the composition copyright, and everything publishing related emanates from that composition copyright. So I want to review that real quick. We'll talk about those rights. We'll talk about performing rights organizations, also known as PROs. You may know them as ASCAP and BMI. And then mechanical rights and licensing, because this is an important revenue stream, mechanical rights that a lot of us miss or don't realize that we are due, as well as talking about very briefly publishing deals and admin deals and sync licensing, all of this with kind of an undercurrent of the revenue streams. Because ultimately, the reason I got into this line of work is because artists should be paid for their rights, for their music. And that's really what this is all about. One of the reasons we run CAFTA, Colorado Attorneys for the Arts, is so that artists can have the representation, can make sure they're paid, and for their rights, they have their rights. Because unfortunately, as we know, a lot of times artists aren't paid so well. So if you cannot afford a lawyer, CAFTA can provide a lawyer for you. I know we have the link in the chat here if you do ever have a need for an attorney. But also, I will say that if there's questions that come up after tonight that pop into your head in the middle of the night, I'll share my email. You're always welcome to reach out to me with a question. always happy to answer that and support in any way we can. Obviously, if it's a more substantive legal issue, like you need to hire an attorney, well, yes, you can hire me, but also if you can't afford an attorney, that's what CAFTA is for as well. So I want to jump right in here with the copyright basics and just talk about what copyright is. Copyright is an intellectual property right. Intellectual property is something we can own, but we can't touch, right? So a copyright, being intellectual property, is just like anything else you own, a car, a chair, I mean, anything you can own, you can buy it, sell it, rent it, lease it. It's just that with copyrights, it's property we can't touch. And I always make sure to think of it as property because it has that value and should be protected like other property. And like I said, we can make revenue from it like other property. So according to the law, which is it's federal law, so it's a federal statute that that describes copyright and gives us these rights, there are these 8 different general types of creative works that are protected by copyright. So copyright protects any sort of creative work. This list is not exclusive, but it basically covers all of it because you may find something where, oh, we've got a multimedia presentation perhaps that has music and video and some text in it. Well, that's all protected by copyright. So when you are recording music or writing music, yes, that's protected by copyright. But don't forget that the artwork that is your album cover is also protected by copyright. And if you, I don't know, write some sort of post or some sort of memoir, anything about your music, that text is protected by copyright. So copyright protects all sorts of creative works, but obviously today we're focusing on the musical works. The musical works is number 2 there, different than the sound recordings, which are the masters, that is number 8, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So by default, well, the thing that you have to know about copyright is copyright exists as soon as we create that work. We say as soon as we lift our pen from the paper, we own that copyright. And so that also applies to any sort of creative work as soon as it is fixed in some way. The copyright law says it has to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression. What that basically means is you can show it to someone. The law was written when we didn't have everything digital in ones and zeros, and you actually had to write something down or press record. But now, yes, if you write a song and it's just on on your hard drive or even in the cloud, that is fixed, and there's a copyright in that that creative work that you came up with. So that copyright exists as soon as it's created, and it's somewhat intuitive, but it's important to mention that the creator of the work is generally going to be the owner of that work. Again, it seems intuitive, like, yes, I wrote that song, I own it, but still I want to make sure to say it because that concept is important to keep in mind throughout this whole discussion, basically, and anytime we're talking about copyright. Also important to keep in mind, though, that if more than one person, if 2 or more people create a copyright, then they are co-owners of that copyright, which means they both have the rights to exploit that copyright. I will use the word exploit throughout this presentation, and it does not have a negative connotation in copyright. So we say exploit basically means to use the copyright. It doesn't mean anything bad. It just means we have this copyright, we're using it in some way that's an exploitation of the copyright. And I mentioned the joint ownership because since anyone who contributes to the creation of a work is a co-owner of that work, that means if you are co-writing with someone, you co-own the copyright in that song you wrote. If you have a bunch of people in the studio and everyone's contributing to a recording, everyone would be a co-owner of that copyright in the recording, unless there's something in writing to the contrary, which I'll get to in a minute. So I think what's important to also discuss is what ownership means. Okay, so what does it mean to own a copyright? Owning a copyright means that you have a set of exclusive rights. Exclusive rights means you're the only one allowed to use those rights. So if you own the copyright, you have the exclusive right to reproduce that copyright. So it makes sense that if you own a sound recording, you're the only one allowed to make copies of that sound recording. No one else can go and start making copies and selling copies of your recording. Same with any book you write, painting you paint, anything like that. Again, it's kind of intuitive the copyright owner is the only person allowed to make copies. Also, the only person allowed to create derivatives. So derivative is a work based on the original. And that means easy examples in the world are kind of like you write a book, you're the only one allowed to make a movie based on that book. That's a derivative. But also, if you write a song and someone makes you want to make a song that sounds a lot like that song, that is a derivative based on the original. And when we see it, there's a lot of the music lawsuits that we see in the news are about that right to make a derivative, because when the Marvin Gaye estate sues Pharrell and Robin Thicke for blurred lines, and that blurred line sounding like the Marvin Gaye song, that's because Marvin Gaye's estate was saying, hey, your song is a derivative of mine. I own the exclusive right to make derivatives. Therefore, you're infringing that right. If someone uses your exclusive copyright without your permission, that's an infringement of your right. So the owner of the copyright is also the only one around to distribute that copyright work, to perform that copyright work, to display it, which doesn't really apply to music very much, and to perform by digital audio transmission is a little wonky. It really applies just to sound recordings, and I think we're talking about sound recordings next week. So come back and learn more about that. Important information for copyright owners is to know that a copyright term, which means the length of time a copyright exists or persists, is for 70 years after the life of the author. So this means that if I write a song today, that copyright exists until 70 years after my death. So basically, a really long time. Okay, so we just want to be thinking about what happens to these copyrights. And people sometimes say, oh, I want to go, sample this song or use this artwork of this guy who died. Does not mean that copyright is no longer in existence. That copyright, at least in the US, under current law, copyright lasts for 70 years after the life of the author. There are variations for this that I won't get into because I do want to kind of focus on the publishing rights we're going to talk about today. Another thing to know about ownership, as I said earlier, you own a copyright as soon as it is created, but we do have a registration system. So we can register that copyright with the US Copyright Office, and the registration is the legal proof of ownership. Now you may say, why do I need to prove that I own it? The reason is, if someone ever infringes your copyright, you need that registration. It's basically your ticket into court. Hopefully that never happens for anybody on this call, but in my line of work, I hear about it quite a bit. And so if someone were to infringe your copyright and you needed to file a lawsuit, you'd need to have that copyright registration. Anyone can go register with the US Copyright Office. The US Copyright Office registration system isn't the easiest to navigate. It's not necessarily intuitive. There are some tricks to it. So if you do embark on that on your own, be very deliberate, watch the tutorials, take it easy, take it careful, or ask a CAFTA attorney to help you with it because it is really important. But regardless of a registration, you can always put that copyright notice on your copyrighted work. So that's just the C in the circle C with the year of publication and the name of the owner. I just have an example here at the bottom of the screen as a copyright notice. We can put it in the liner notes, can put it on a video, you can put it on an album if we're printing physical albums, in the metadata. All really important just to say, hey, this is mine. I'm claiming it as mine. So the last thing I want to mention about copyright in general is that, as I said earlier, copyright is, well, it's property, and property can be transferred. When we use copyright language, we say the copyright can be assigned, but that's the same thing as transferring it, selling it, right, is a way to transact the copyright. But it's really important to know that any transfer of copyright has to be in writing. And the reason I mention that here is because let's say you're going to the studio and you are hiring a bunch of musicians to participate in your recording, to sit in, maybe you need some horns for this track or something. And as I said earlier, anyone who contributes to that sound recording copyright is a co-owner of that copyright. But you say, no, I'm paying these guys, I'm going to own it all. And they're just hired guns, which is fine, but that has to be in writing. And this also applies to any co-writing that we're doing, and when it comes to the these publishing rights we're going to talk about, a transfer has to be in writing. Also, an exclusive license has to be in writing, which means if you're granting the rights to someone and they're the only one allowed to use it, that also has to be in writing to be enforceable. So we just want to be really careful of handshake deals or assumed transfers like that, because we do have to have it in writing. The exception is what's called a work for hire. A work for hire is basically, I hired you to create the work, I own the work. So this could happen with studio musicians, right? Where you're saying, I'm hiring you to do this work, I own it, we're doing it as a work for hire. But a work for hire only occurs in two scenarios. One is if the person creating the work is an employee creating the work within the scope of their employment. So chances are your studio musician is not going to be your employee, because an employee is a full-time W-2 employee, someone who that is their job all the time. Not very likely in this situation. More likely, maybe if someone is a performer in the symphony orchestra or something, and that is their full-time job. But for the most part, that work for hire will only happen by contract, which is the other example. In contract, again, we need something in writing saying, this is a work for hire, you're transferring all the rights to me. There are some tricks to writing those things, those contracts. I know we talked about a little bit about contracts last week. We're going to talk about specific contracts a few weeks from now. So again, keep joining us. We'll make sure to get into all those details. So that is my copyright overview. Certainly, as you know, pop a question in the chat if anything is left confusing, but now we can dive into the meat of today, which is the publishing rights. So there are two copyrights in music. And I know we talked about this last week, but basically there's a copyright in the composition, which is the words in music, what is written down when you write a song. Now, again, I know most these days we're not actually taking pencil to paper and writing a song, but the idea is there's a copyright in the song that is written, which is separate from the copyright in the sound recording, which we often call the master. So basically, I can write a song, I'm going to own the copyright in that composition. I can hand that song, that music, that sheet music, for just to give you the visual, I hand that sheet music to someone else, a recording artist who goes and records that song. They're going to be the owner of the copyright in the sound recording. So you got to keep these things separate and keep them in mind whenever we're creating music. A lot of times, I'm going to write a song and record it, then I own both copyrights. But let's say I'm in a band. Let's say there's 4 guys in the band. Well, I write the song, I own the composition. All 4 of us record the song, all 4 of us own that sound recording. So it's really important to keep these things separate in our minds, the composition copyright and the sound recording copyright. Now, no one ever said that music law was easy. And one of the hardest things about music law is the words that we use, the nomenclature, because it can get confusing. It's particularly confusing in this scenario because the composition is most of the time referred to as the publishing rights. Okay, so composition and publishing are the same thing, okay? As sound recording and master are the same thing. So I tend to use composition and sound recording because those are the legal terms, the technical copyright terms, and also because publishing can get a little confusing, and I'll explain why once we start talking about PROs. But just, I'm going to talk about the composition. I may use composition and publishing interchangeably because they are pretty much meaning the same thing. So let's talk about the composition copyright. It is owned by the contributors to the songwriting. And again, pretty intuitive. We think whoever writes a song co-owns that song. But again, that's going to be separate from the sound recording. So when we say, oh, that person's getting 5% of publishing, that means they're getting 5% of the ownership in the composition. Now, a lot of times I get the question, well, how do we know? How do we know who owns what percentage? And there isn't really a standard formula. Now, in traditional music, and I don't know exactly, I use that word very loosely, but there is oftentimes we say, well, 50% is for the music and 50% is for the lyrics. That doesn't apply in all sorts of music, especially these days, whether it's in hip hop or EDM, that doesn't always apply as well. If you've just got a beat is most of what the music is, the lyrics may have more value or more weight, so to speak. So it's important to have these conversations and talk about with all the co-writers, whoever's contributing, whoever's in the room or on the sheet, basically on the music, who's ever contributing to writing the music. We want to have that conversation about who is going to own what percentage. And I encourage people to do this as early as possible, because I've been in the situation, I've been on, in a meeting with a band who's trying to figure out who owns what long after we left the studio, and no one really remembers exactly what happened, and it can get contentious. So easiest to avoid that contention and lay it out in the room as soon as you can, with everybody who's contributing to that composition. I will also say that sometimes contributors to a composition can be work for hire. I mentioned studio musicians, someone who's just a hired gun. Maybe they add a solo or add a line or something. Then we want to make sure that it's clear about, do they own it or do they not? Because if they don't own it, that has to be in writing. Top liners as well. A lot of top liners are brought into a studio and are signing a work for hire and not own any rights. Not that that's required, but just keep this in mind when we're in that creative process, because we want to be clear about who owns the rights. Oftentimes, a producer will have a percentage of the composition. That, again, varies song to song, producer to producer, deal to deal. So we want to have that in writing. We'll talk about producer agreements a few weeks from now. Come back for that, because that's only one of the terms in a producer agreement. But important to note that there are other people, sometimes even mixing engineers will sometimes be granted a percentage. Sometimes that's because we don't have as much cash to pay them, and we'll dig into that. But the point is, lots of different people can have a piece of the publishing, a percentage of the composition, and we just want to make sure that's clear. So how do we make sure that's clear? We get it in writing. What do we call that writing? We call it a split sheet. Okay, a split sheet is a simple contract. Now, Max last week talked about how a contract is basically just a written agreement. It's when we have a meeting of the minds. So when multiple parties, 2 or more parties, have an agreement and there is something offered, something accepted, something of value changing hands, we have a contract. Okay, so a split sheet, it's a contract, but it's a really simple contract. Okay, it basically just has to have the very basics of the ownership of those composition rights. So those percentages, what we call the percentages of publishing. So all it has to have is the name of the song that we're talking about, the names of the owners or the contributors, and the percentages owned by each person. Really basic, just say, hey, we all agree this is how we're splitting up this copyright. Now, if you are a singer-songwriter, you're writing the entire song, you don't need a split sheet with yourself, you own 100% of it, right? But to the extent that other people are participating, let's get it in writing. The other information on that split sheet is to have the performing rights organization info. I will talk about performing rights organizations in a minute, but I did want to make sure to mention that because it's a good thing to have on your split sheet. The additional terms that can be added to a split sheet is if we want to add control over those rights, this composition copyright. Because, for example, if we have a situation where there's a lead songwriter and then maybe a producer or a studio session musician, someone else is getting a percentage, but it's that lead songwriter's song that they're going to release, we may put in there that songwriter is the only one allowed to release it, or is the only one allowed to control licensing for it. So that someone who owns just a few percentage points of the publishing can't go granting a license without permission of the others. Because one thing to know about the co-ownership of copyrights is that when multiple people own a copyright, any one of those owners can grant a license, can exploit the copyright. All they have is an obligation to account to the other owners. So better to have everybody on the same page. If we're saying, hey, I wrote this song, I'm going to record it, I'm going to release it, we can put that in the split sheet to say what it is or to say that I'm the only one who is allowed to do it. So let's see, we can talk at some point. I see there's a question in the chat about the turn point when it comes to crediting mixing engineers with a royalty. So a point is 1% of 100% of the composition is basically what a point is. when it comes to a percentage, well, actually, I take that back. A percentage royalty is different than a point when it comes to producers and mixers. And that is very confusing. And we'll probably talk about in the producer agreement part of the series, but very basically, we talk about producer points. I know this question is about a mixer, but I much more frequently hear about producer points. And a producer point is actually a percentage of the retail price, which is very different than a percentage of the composition. So that is a really, I appreciate you bringing that up because it is important. As I said earlier, the nomenclature, the words we use can be confusing in music law, and a producer point is different than a percentage of ownership of the composition. So there is also a copyright. Does that percentage come from the copyright and the percentage? Again, since the composition and the sound recording are completely separate copyrights, ownership of a percentage in the composition has nothing to do with ownership of the sound, a percentage of the sound recording. Someone can own both. Let's say there's 4 members of a band. They each own 25% of the composition. They all go to the studio together. They each own 25% of the sound recording. But that is not automatic because, as I said earlier, there could be 4 guys in the band. I write the composition and own all of it. And then we, the 4 of us, contribute to the sound recording, and it is different. So it is not that does not happen automatically, basically. So appreciate the question. Thank you. Keep them coming. But let me keep on moving here to the next slide, because I do want to make sure to talk about money. That is really what matters a lot in this business, right? So talking about the revenue streams is a good way to kind of lay out a lot of this conversation or this presentation we're having today, because by going through the revenue streams, we're going to cover a lot of the rights and the rights that we're worried about with the composition, because basically ownership of a copyright entitles you to revenue for the exploitation of that copyright. But there's a lot of different ways that revenue is generated. There's a lot of different revenue streams. And so I find an easy way to break down this conversation is to break it down by the revenue streams. So there are these are the 4 main revenue streams from the publishing right, from the composition copyright. And basically, we'll talk about public performance. That's our ASCAP and BMI. We'll talk about mechanicals. It's an important automatic source of income. And we'll talk about sync, which is what a lot of us are chasing, licensing. We won't talk about print because it does not happen a lot, but it's good to keep in mind that if you think about, you write a song and there is sheet music to that song. If someone wants to make copies of that sheet music, they need permission from the owner of the composition because they're reproducing and distributing that copyright. So this happens a lot with show tunes, with musicals. That sheet music is very important. It happens a lot with orchestrated works. We're having a chamber chamber performance or an orchestral performance. All that sheet music actually comes down, and we can't just go Xerox or make copies of the sheet music, because that is an exclusive right that's reserved to the copyright owner. So that's about all I need to say about print, but I always welcome questions about it. It just usually isn't as prevalent to most of the people who are on this call. So first revenue stream is the public performance right. Now, a public performance is any performance to a group larger than family and close friends. So this means it's not just someone standing on stage and performing. It's really easy way to think about it is it's any time the music is played over a speaker. Okay. Now it could be played if it's not being played live. And what I mean by that is when a composition, whether that song is played over the radio, played over the speaker in a bar or a restaurant or a health club, played over Spotify on your phone, that is a public performance of the composition. Now, you're thinking, well, yeah, but it's also a public performance of the sound recording. That is true. That's next week. It is always, you can't separate the composition and the sound recording, right? They're intrinsically linked. There may be multiple sound recordings of a composition, but every time that composition in any recorded form is played over a speaker, it is a public performance. Okay, and this is when you may remember, however, it was 20 minutes ago, that I was showing you those exclusive rights, right? The right to reproduce, the right to create a derivative, the right to distribute, and the right to perform. So if you own a copyright in a composition, you have the exclusive right to perform that composition. And the uh, the problem with that is that you can't go and control for all that, or it's very hard to go and control for all that. Okay, so basically, this all came about when we first had recorded music. Okay, because prior to recorded music, the only way a composition was performed was live. As you pretty much know, most of the time your composition was being performed. As soon as we had recorded music, or even actually the player piano is actually when this started, right? Because a piano would play the music, even though you weren't didn't need live people to do it. So as soon as music could be performed without the composer knowing about it, well, now we have this problem, right? I wrote a song. I own the composition. I own the exclusive right to perform that music. But I can't be in every place where that music is being performed. I can't be in every concert hall, every bar, restaurant, health club where my music is being performed. So how do I account for that? How do I make sure, first of all, to grant the rights to all those people performing my music and to get paid for it? Well, that's where the performing rights organizations come in. The performing rights organizations, I will refer to them as PROs, less of a mouthful, but the PROs do the licensing for us. So since I own this composition copyright, I want it to be performed as much as possible because I want to collect all that revenue. I can't be in every place at once. The PROs go and do it for me. So we have 4 different PROs in the US, which is really annoying. A lot of countries only have one, makes it a lot easier. Let's be honest right now, we're stuck with the 4 we have. So you've probably heard of ASCAP and BMI. Those are the most common ones that we hear of because anyone can join them. And then we also have CSAC, and a more recent entry onto the scene is Global Music Rights, or GMR. They represent a far smaller number or fewer artists out there. And so these PROs are out there basically collecting for and ideally paying money to musicians. So how does this work? Okay. As I explained, we have the copyright owner has the exclusive right. Since we can't be everywhere, as a copyright owner, I license my music to the PRO. I say, PRO, I'm licensing you only the performance right. I'm not giving you a right to record it. I'm not giving you a right to synchronize it in TV and movies. I'm just giving the PRO the right to perform it so they can go and collect for that performance. These PROs then grant licenses to the places where our music is performed. Okay, so the most common example of PRO licenses is at venues. Okay, so the Bluebird, the Gothic, the Ogden, the Mission, Red Rocks, they all have PRO licenses. So that when a musician gets up on stage and they play a song, it is licensed, that performance is licensed. Now, PRs are also licensing to the radio stations and to the DSPs, which are the digital service providers, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, Amazon, Tidal. They all have PRO licenses. So everywhere your music is being performed should have a license. And it's a blanket license. So what that means is if I own a venue, okay, I'm going to open up a venue. I'm going to have bands perform my venue, or even DJs are just performing. I'm just playing music over the loud. So I'm just, we're just playing mixtapes in my venue. Any music that's being played, I go to these PROs and I say, I need a license. And the PRO grants me a license to all the music in their catalog. Okay, so millions of musicians sign up with these PROs, or millions of songs are represented by these PROs. So when I go to, let's say, ASCAP, I give my license to ASCAP. Thousands upon thousands of musicians have given ASCAP rights to millions upon millions of songs. So any ASCAP song that is played in my music venue is covered by that license. And then that music venue or radio station or Spotify pays a fee to the PRO, and the PRO splits up the money among all of the artists whose music they represent. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, how do they know whether my song was played and how many times. I can't say they know exactly, but they do. They have their algorithms. They do surveys, so they do. I mean, radio stations have to report, and obviously DSPs have the list of every song they play. There's a lot of data involved. I can't say that by signing up with a PRO, you're suddenly going to be getting thousands of dollars a month. But if you don't sign up with a PRO, you're not getting any money. Okay, so there's no reason not to sign up with a PRO because their job is to go out there and collect the money for you. And there are, like I said, ASCAP or BMI, anyone can go sign up with them. CSAC or GMR, you need an invite to sign up with them. But as long as you're getting your music, registered, then they should be collecting for you. And I will tell you, the most common way you're going to start seeing PRO money is when music, I mean, if you're getting tons of streams, sure. But if it is in like a TV show or a commercial or something that's getting a lot of play like that, that is when a lot of that PRO money starts to increase. But again, there's kind of no reason not to sign up for PRO. One of the most common misconceptions, okay, is that if you sign up for a PRO, that's all your publishing money. And that's not the case. The PRO is only collecting for the public performance. Okay, so we're going to talk about these other revenue streams, and just keep in mind, signing up for a PRO is important, but they do not control it. They will not collect all your publishing revenue. But it is a good thing to do. I certainly encourage it. And as far as which one is better, ASCAP or BMI, there's a lot of different opinions on that depending on who you talk to. So I will not opine on that. It doesn't. I will definitely say talk to your friends who have signed up with them and see what they say. So one of the things that happens with PROs is that our rights are basically split in half. Okay, or actually the revenue streams are split in half. So you may have heard of the writer's share and the publisher's share. And this is where the nomenclature gets confusing. And the reason I refer to as the composition rights is because the composition rights are split into the writer's share and the publisher's share. It's much more confusing to say the publishing is split into the writer's share and the publisher's share. Say the publisher's share, the publishing, the writer's share, the publishing, it seems it's a little bit more of a mouthful. In any event, we basically have a writer's share and a publisher's share. What this is about is that the composition copyright, a lot of times, at least traditionally and much more in the past, a songwriter would say to a publishing company, hey, publishing company, I want you to go collect my publishing revenue, the money that's going to come in from my composition. This still happens a lot. I'm just saying this is how we got a writer's share and publisher share. So since the songwriter had said to a publishing company, you can go collect, what came out of that basically was half the money would go to the publishing company, half the money would go to the songwriter. Therefore, we have half is the publisher's share, half is the writer's share. Now, this is while publishing was still, we weren't self-published, but basically the reason I mention it now is that it's not about splitting up the ownership, it's about splitting up the revenue streams. And the reason that's important is because if you write a song, you own 100% of the writer's share and 100% of the publisher's share. You own the entire song, right? It's not that you're splitting up the copyright in half. It is that you're allowing your publishing company to go collect half of the money, the publisher's share. So if you are not working with a publishing company, you collect all the writer's share and all the publisher's share. One thing, just to make it more confusing, sometimes that is referred to as 50% and sometimes it's referred to as 100%. What I'm saying is, I write a song. Sometimes a PRO will say, well, 50% of that revenue is the writer's share, 50% is the publisher's share, making 100%. Other times a PRO will say, well, we've got 100% of the writer's share and 100% of the publisher's share. That's 200%. It's annoying. It is mind-numbing. I apologize. I can't do anything about it, but that is what we get stuck with. So the other thing I want to make sure to talk about is setting up PRO accounts, because there is a writer's account and a publisher's account. Now, I will go back and say that you can only sign up with one PRO at a time. You can leave one PRO for the other. It can be challenging, but it is doable. So we really, it really makes it easier if you sign up for the PRO and you stick with that PRO, because they are going to be controlling all your rights and they'll be collecting for a long time, ideally collecting a lot of money for you. But when you sign up, you're going to register all your songs and you're going to give them the name of each song and then who owns the writer's share and in what percent, and who owns the publisher's share and in what percent. So this goes back to when I was saying on our split sheets a long time ago, like half an hour ago, when I was talking about split sheets. And I said we wanted the name of the song, the name of the songwriters, the percentage ownership, and the PRO information. The reason is so that you can go and sign up and enter everyone's PRO information so that there's a complete list that says, here are all the songwriters, it equals 100%. We know what everybody's share is and how much of the composition copyright each person owns. I will make this point, I may have said this a moment ago, but that since we have to claim the writer's share and the publisher's share for each song or each composition, if you are not working with the publishing company, if you are your own, you're what we call self-published, then you need to sign up for a writer's account and a publisher's account. It is two separate accounts with the PRO because they pay the writer's share and the publisher's share separately. So making it, just like I said, doubly as confusing, make it even more fun. But the PROs, once you get it all set up, it's actually pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and doesn't take a lot of time. But getting that done is important because we want to collect those public performance royalties. So I know I saw a few things fly through the chat, but I think they've mostly been answered because I know I am going to be talking about the MLC here in a little bit. So we'll get to that. So let's talk about the next revenue stream, okay, which is mechanical rights. So the mechanical right is basically the right to mechanically reproduce a composition, basically to record a composition into a sound recording. That's the use of the mechanical right. So every time you hear a sound recording, it is mechanically reproducing somebody's composition. Now, if you think about it, I own a composition. I own the exclusive right to exploit this composition. Therefore, I own the right to have it mechanically reproduced, right? So every recording of any composition does require the mechanical license, requires us to get the rights, whoever's creating that recording has to get the rights to mechanically reproduce that composition. Now, of course, if I write a song and I'm recording the song, I'm basically granting myself the mechanical right. But the most common example of this is a cover song. Because we all know everybody records covers. There's countless covers out there. It's full, there's bands that are tribute bands that record cover albums of an entire band, or we have tribute albums that are a bunch of different musicians playing the same band, whatever it is, covers are everywhere. Well, if you think about it, if I'm going to go record a cover, right, I'm going to be using someone else's composition. They have to give me the right, or at least I owe them for that right. Okay, so basically and the mechanical right actually works differently, or the mechanical license works differently. So I'll talk about this, but just a good way to think of the mechanical is in the cover tune scenario, because you always have one person who wrote the song, a different person who recorded the song. The person who recorded the song is exploiting the mechanical right to mechanically reproduce that composition. So we'll talk about mechanical licensing. It is basically that the first thing to know is that the first time a composition is recorded, is mechanically reproduced in a recording, the owner of the composition has the exclusive right to make the first recording of that composition. So I own the right. If I write a song, I'm the only person, I control the right to make that first recording. So if maybe I'm just a songwriter and I work in Nashville and I just do songwriting, and everyone else, I have artists who, performing artists recording my song, they have to get that permission from me for that first mechanical right. However, once a song is published, once a song is released, then anyone can go and record a cover. Anyone can go and mechanically reproduce that song. There is an obligation to pay a mechanical licensing fee, but it is what's called a compulsory license. As a required license, it is also known as a statutory license. So once a song is out there, once that first recording has been released or published, according to copyright law, anyone else can go make a sound recording of it, which is why we have cover, their covers are so rampant. Not that's a bad thing, it's just that anyone can go record a cover. You just can't be the first person to make a sound recording of that composition unless you get permission from the composition copyright owner. Another thing to keep in mind about this obligation or this mechanical license is that generally a label needs to get a mechanical license from a songwriter. So again, a lot of times like, well, I wrote these songs, I recorded these songs, I'm now signing with a label or even a distributor. Well, that label or distributor they're exercising the mechanical right because they're printing physical, they're printing vinyl, or they're downloads or streams. These are all mechanical reproductions, right? And so they're part of a label deal, which again, we will talk about label deals later in this session or in these sessions. But part of a label deal is a negotiation of making sure you're getting, or are you getting paid that mechanical right? How is it part of the calculation of royalties? And so just something to keep in mind because this revenue stream doesn't just go away when we sign a label deal. We don't have to pay ourselves a mechanical, right? If I write a song and I record it, don't have to actually transact that money with myself. But always keep in mind, because there are this use of recordings does generate a mechanical royalty. So you can certainly grant yourself a free license. You may not want to grant others a free license. So what is this licensing fee? Okay, because it is not negotiated. Okay, so a mechanical licensing fee is set. It is set by the Copyright Royalty Board. The Copyright Royalty Board is a trio of judges that work under the Copyright Office. There's a whole scheme for this that you don't want to hear about. The point is they choose the fee. And basically, and that fee is the default fee. So basically, if you're going to go record a cover, there's an automatic amount you have to pay to the songwriter or to the composition copyright owner for the mechanical right to reproduce this song. That fee is set. It can be negotiated, but the point is you don't need permission. You don't have to go and say, hey, David Byrne, I want to record your song. Will you give me permission? You just have to say, hey, songwriter or composition copyright owner, I'm going to record your song. I'm going to pay you this fee. Now, we can negotiate with the songwriter if we want to. And a lot of times there's something called a 3/4 deal or a 75% deal. Sometimes we negotiate to pay only 75% of the statutory fee. But the fee is set by statute or set by the Copyright Royalty Board. So we don't need to negotiate it. We can just go record covers and pay the fee. The fee is weird and can be confusing because there are different fees for physical and digital. And the simple example is that for physical, it's 12.7 cents per copy. Well, it's the greater of 12.7 cents per copy or 2.43 cents per minute. Usually that ends up, most of our songs aren't longer than 5 or 6 minutes, mostly. So generally it ends up being 12.7 cents per copy. What per copy means is per printed CD, vinyl, I guess, flash drive. But it really applies to physical reproductions. And if, for example, let's say you're releasing a vinyl, if there is one cover song on that vinyl, you owe 12.7 cents for each vinyl printed. If there's 2 cover songs, you owe 25.2 cents for each vinyl printed, and so on. So this is very different than for digital, and I'll talk about how digital is paid, because it's unfortunately confusing. But digital is actually a percentage of the revenue. Digital, I should clarify, digital mechanicals are paid by the DSPs, which are the digital service providers. Again, the Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music titles of the world. So instead of the DSPs paying per track, they do pay per track. What they do is 15 to 5% of their revenue goes to mechanicals. And then it is divided by how many songs were played or which songs were played. this is more information than you need to know, but just to give you an idea of, it is a complicated computation, but it is still getting paid. So when your music is getting played on Spotify, it is a mechanical reproduction of your composition. A mechanical licensing fee is due. So how are we paying mechanicals? We want to collect this revenue. I know Dave is sitting here talking about all this revenue. You guys want to hear how we collect the revenue. So this is where we're getting to the MLC. I know I saw a question about the MLC. MLC, it's three letters you really want to know, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. Okay, so I'll talk about that first. Mechanical Licensing Collective was created by a law passed in 2018, I believe it was, so relatively new. But basically the problem was that the DSPs weren't paying mechanicals. We can talk about why, and there's different opinions on that, but the point is we needed to create a system for DSPs to pay mechanicals. So we created the Mechanical Licensing Collective. So instead of having, like we have 4 different PROs, there is just one licensing or revenue collecting body for mechanicals. And what happens is the DSPs pay money to the MLC. The MLC pays those mechanical license fees to the copyright owners. So very basically, sign up with the MLC and you'll get your mechanical royalties. We can't control, I mean, you don't have control over how much the MLC collects, but they will hold on to your money for you and pay your money. I think they recently surpassed $12 billion in revenues, royalties distributed. So they are doing it, and it's very transparent. In fact, if you have questions about MLC, their website, they do webinars. They do provide a lot of information and updates and things of that nature. So they're pretty good at that. It is free to sign up. So again, no reason not to go and collect that revenue. As opposed to physical, which is a little bit more complicated, because physical still operates under an old scheme where there isn't one government created licensing clearinghouse or royalty clearinghouse. There is something called Harry Fox. You may have heard of the Harry Fox Agency. Also, Songfile is basically their online portal. But basically, Harry Fox and Songfile, you can go and basically sign up with them. And if someone wanted to record your song and print physical or do downloads flash drives, things like that of your song, it would get collected by Harry Fox. Harry Fox would pay you. Similarly, if you want to go record a cover and you don't know how to, and you want to print physical of this cover, you're going to release an album, you're going to release a vinyl that has someone else's song on it, you can go and try and find, if they are on Songfile, you can go pay the license fee through Songfile and not have to chase this person down individually and figure out how to pay them and all that. So Harry Fox Songfile is an option, and but it is paid directly. Well, it basically the money gets back to the composition copyright owner through that portal. So I can't say that mechanicals are simple, but none of this publishing stuff is simple. If it was, maybe you wouldn't need to be here tonight. But hopefully that is a good explanation. Mechanicals, because we really do want you to be getting paid your mechanicals. So at the very bare minimum, you can sign up with Harry Fox so that if someone wants to make a physical recording of your mechanical, they can find you that way. But definitely signing up with the MLC. That most of our publishing revenue these days is from mechanical, or rather, a significant publishing revenue stream is from mechanicals. It's money sitting out there waiting to be collected, so we do want to collect it. We have a question in the chat. Do the MLC and services such as DistroKid collect the same money? No. The MLC is collecting your mechanicals. DistroKid is not. However, an important explanation, I'm going to get to this when I say work with a publishing company, because a publishing company can also collect your publishing royalties. So jump into that real quick, because everything I just said about PROs and MLC can be varied depending on if you are represented by a publishing company, if you have a publishing deal, or what we will call an admin deal. So talk about this next. Unless there are any more MLC questions, pop in the chat. So yes, I see someone saying about TuneCore and DistroKid. So I will get to that here in talking about publishing companies, because there are your distribution companies like TuneCore and DistroKid will offer to collect your publishing revenue. That is a box you can check. That is an additional service you can engage in with them, but is not required. And you want to be really careful about giving up those publishing rights, because we want to make sure that we are collecting that publishing revenue. Some of our distributors, there are, again, as most of you or many of you probably know, there's a lot of online distribution companies like TuneCore, DistroKid, CD Baby, United Masters that will get our music on the DSPs, right? They digitally distribute our music for us because we can't go directly to Spotify and say, hey, Spotify, play my music. But you can go to one of these distributors and say, hey, put this on Spotify for me. When you go sign up, they may ask you, hey, do you want us to collect your publishing revenue? You can do that, but you want to think carefully about it, because once you click that box, it is not so easy to get out. Okay, so what they're offering to do is to act as your publishing company. Now, publishing companies, again, arose for the purpose of helping to collect the money from and exploit the composition copyright. Okay, so people basically, songwriters said, in the same way we have record labels that collect money for and distribute and exploit our sound recordings, our masters, publishing companies exploit and collect money for and try to find opportunities for the composition, the publishing rights. Okay, and there's a lot of different types of publishing deals. So something that's like an exclusive publishing deal is something where a songwriter is giving a publishing company all the rights to their publishing, all the rights to their compositions. The publishing company's job is to go find ways to make money off of that composition, and then to go collect all the money from that composition. Now, there are, as I said, there's a lot of different ways that we can do publishing deals, but that's and I'll talk about them. But the basic idea of a publishing company is that they deal in the composition. They deal in the publishing rights. So they are out there trying to make money from the publishing. They collect money from the publishing. Now, these revenue streams that we're talking about, they're collecting your performance revenue, they're collecting your mechanical revenues, and then they're paying some of that back to the copyright owner. That sum that they're paying is called a royalty. Those royalty rates vary depending on the deal. So the different ways, whoops, that went too far. The different ways that we can do a publishing deal. Well, then we talk about the terms that we're dealing with, because one of the main terms in a publishing deal is what songs is the publishing company going to have the rights to. So an exclusive publishing deal could grant a publishing company the rights to an entire catalog, every song that the songwriter has ever written. It can also include the future catalog, every song the songwriter is going to write during the term of this deal. So they can be pretty expansive. Now, these exclusive publishing deals, these major publishing deals, sometimes they come with an advance. They can be attractive that way. But we always want to think about this, what we're getting in return, because if you're giving up the rights to all the songs you're going to write in the future, that could be worth a lot of money, right? Now, that is a type of publishing deal that we would shop for. That is not something you just kind of like, fill out a form and click submit and you get a publishing deal like that. Because that's something where the publishing company is really investing in the songwriter, really believes in the songwriter, thinks the songwriter is going to be very successful and make a lot of money. There are less extensive publishing deals where maybe it is just for an album or even just a single song. Maybe it is only for a set amount of time. So you're saying only for the songs that I write over the next 5 years. There's a lot of different ways that we negotiate these deals, a lot of different deal terms in a publishing deal. So it's really important to dig into these details, because it'll make a big difference in the long run. Because one of the other things that varies is the royalty percentage, right? How much does the publishing company keep, and how much do they give, what royalty do they pay back to you? And I'm not at all trying to characterize the publishing deals are a bad deal because, again, in a publishing deal like this, the publishing company's job is to go make money for you, to go make money from this composition copyright. And so they're increasing the money that's coming in, therefore they're taking a piece of it. Also, it can be hard to collect all these different revenue streams, right? It's time consuming. A lot of times you'd rather be writing music, playing music, touring, whatever else you're doing, instead of being your own publisher and chasing all this money. So the publishing companies definitely have value. And that is why I'm saying I'm not meaning to characterize it in a negative light. It's just you want to be thinking about doing a publishing deal because you could be giving up a lot of rights, and they can go on for a long time. So certainly, if you're facing a publishing deal, please hire an attorney to deal with it. If you can't afford an attorney, you can go to CAFTA. If you can't afford an attorney, Max and I do these all the time, but it is really, they're complicated, I guess is my point. So make sure to consider all these different terms, talk to someone who knows how these things work and how these deals work. So there's a different type of publishing deal that is called an admin deal. And an admin deal is for administration only. Administration is collecting the revenue. So admin deals are publishing deals where the publisher isn't trying to go make more revenue. They're just using their mechanisms to collect all that revenue, again, freeing you up to go and be a musician, right? And these admin deals are open to anyone. Or well, I should say that. There are admin deals that are open to anyone. So there are companies out there that will allow you to sign up, and they don't care who you are, whether you've had a song on, whether you ever published a song before, because what they're doing is they're going to say, we will put you into our system. We will use our system to collect all your money. We will take a smaller percentage and we will pay it to you, 10, 20% in an admin deal. The administration or the publisher, the admin company, will take, and then but they're not doing more than that because you're not paying them to do more than that. So when we were talking about DistroKid or CD Baby, those sorts of click to let me take care of your publishing or let you take care of my publishing, those are admin deals. They're not going to try and make money off of your music any more than anyone else's. They're just collecting the revenue. And again, you want to be doing your research before you go into one of these admin deals. There's another common one is called Song Trust. I heard Cobalt is a major publisher that is just announced they're going to start offering a platform like this. So there's a lot of them out there. So doing your research is worth it because, again, you're giving up your publishing rights. Most of these admin deals are terminable, which means you can get out of them, but a lot of them have a minimum term, so you have to stay for at least a year. And then maybe you have to give them 6 months notice before you terminate or things like that. So reading the small print is really important when doing any sort of publishing deal, including an admin deal, because the admin deals aren't usually negotiable. It's a click to agree generally. It's like a standard contract. Usually, not always, but usually that's how that works. And so they're not bad. The good thing about an admin deal is that they're going to go and collect for you. So every time you write a song, you don't have to go to the MLC and sign up your song, and to the PRO and sign up your song, because the admin goes and does that for you. And so the reason I mentioned that is because when I was talking about the MLC and I said, go sign up with the MLC, if you have a publisher, your publisher is collecting your mechanicals. So they will go to the MLC for you. Even an admin deal, they will collect your MLC, your mechanical royalties for you. If you have an admin deal or a publishing deal, that publishing company will go and collect the publisher's share of the PRO money. So the publisher's share from ASCAP or BMI. So again, I know it's confusing, but I'm trying to link all these things together for us, right? There's a flow to all these things. There's a reason, a method to the madness, if you will. The reason that I've kind of talked about it in this order is because it does happen that the understanding these publishing deals and admin deals affect how we're going to register with the PRO, with the MLC, to make sure we're collecting as much money as we can. And a lot of times I do think admin deals are worthwhile because a lot of times you end up with more money total because that publishing company is collecting things you might not have collected, even though they're taking their whatever 10 or 15%. Your gross, what you end up in your pocket may end up being more. I know there were a bunch of messages going on here, but I don't think there's anything that I didn't hit. Let's see, because I know Max was jumping in. Let me just look real quick. TuneCore's offers publishing. Yeah, there's no sync. We will be talking about sync later. Or actually, I'm going to talk about sync now. So that's a great great segue. So why don't we talk about sync? Because like as we talked about, an admin deal is not going to find you a sync, but an admin will collect for the PRs, for the public performance royalties that are generated by that sync. So what is a sync? A sync is a synchronization license or a synchronization of your music with a moving image. Okay, so that means anytime that music is in a TV show, radio, video game, music video, okay, anytime is with a moving image, that is a synchronization of the music. Now, unlike the public performance right, unlike the mechanical right, this is not statutory. It is not a set deal. These are negotiated deals. So someone can't just take your music, put in a movie and say, I'm paying you this flat fee. Okay, they have to say, hey, I want to put your music in my movie. How much do I have to pay you? These are negotiated deals. And it can be quite lucrative because we get to name our price. There are a lot of different ways to get sync deals. I'll talk about that, but understand that the license to put music in a movie or put music with a moving image is generally is individually negotiated license, so that someone has to ask your permission to put your music in that movie or to synchronize your music with that moving image. Now, one thing to keep in mind is it does involve both copyrights, right? You can't have a composition in a movie without the sound recording also in the movie. So both the two copyrights are often called the sides. So there's two sides to a sync, the composition and the sound recording, but both are required. And what sometimes happens is what I've seen, someone who's making a movie may say, well, instead of paying for that sound recording, I'm going to go create my own sound recording. So I'm just going to license the composition. So if let's say I'm a filmmaker, I'm going to go to a musician and say, hey, I want your music in my film. Let me get a sync to the composition. I'll go create a sound recording of it. I'll owe a mechanical royalty. And then I'll use my sound recording so I don't have to pay to sync the sound recording. But for the most part, most of the time, someone who wants to sync your music has heard the recording and likes that recording. So they're going to need the synchronization license to both copies, basically, both sides, both copyrights, sorry, both sides of the song. And those can be negotiated separately. They can be negotiated together if it is the same owner, right? If I own my composition and I own my sound recording, then I can license both sides to that licensee under one license. I also mentioned it could be very lucrative because people often don't realize how much money is involved for for well-known music. So music that is, the music that is top of the charts, so the music that is classic, that everybody knows, that is, the classic rock or the original hip hop or whatever it is, stuff that everybody knows, those songs are worth literally millions of dollars. So when I'm watching a movie like Guardians of the Galaxy, or these movies that have all this music that you know so well, or that I do, because that's how old I am, I guess. They've spent millions of dollars on licensing the music for those movies. Now, you may not be the Rolling Stones, you may not be, Dr. Dre, so maybe your music isn't worth millions, but it's worth something. So when we're talking about deals, okay, we want to beware of offers for, oh, we're going to put your music in this movie. It's going to give you lots of exposure, but we don't want to pay you anything. If we can get money, it's usually worthwhile. Now, if they want to put your music in, the next Marvel movie, okay, it's probably going to give you a lot of exposure. You're going to get a lot of performing royalties, PRO money from that. Okay, but for the most part, let's try and negotiate a good deal for ourselves. Get some real money for it. It's usually a flat fee, not usually royalty based. It's easier that way, right? So there you don't have to be tracking how many times has the movie been played or the advertisement been played. But generally, we do it for a flat fee. We want to have it in writing. Really important. Again, contracts, we'll talk about at various points during this series, but contracts are really important. So we want to have a contract for this. And we want to be specific about what uses are allowed, because maybe this is an independent movie that they don't have distribution yet. They don't have a lot of money. They're just going to show it in film festivals. You can say, okay, I'll give you a license for the film festival. When you get distribution and they're going to go out, you get it on Netflix, you have to come back to me to get a digital distribution license. Or sometimes you're going to say you can use it in anywhere you use the movie, but if you want to use it in an ad for the movie, you have to pay me more. These are all negotiated deal points. Right? So it's not for all licenses and really for all contracts. A lot of people say, oh, it's super simple. It's how much money and I get paid. There's always more to it. That's why we have a job. I don't mean to be glib, but that's what lawyers do, is to know all these terms. Or maybe you're working with a manager who knows the deal points that should be negotiated before the lawyer takes a look at the contract. But yeah, there's a lot to these things, and you want to be really clear on these points. A contract should always be unequivocal, always very clear and definitive, so there's no room for misinterpretation about what the deal actually was. And we all want these sync deals because they are lucrative. So when we get the offer, we're going to be eager to go get it. But still, you don't want to rush it more than necessary. So we get the rights clear, know exactly what the terms are, and get the best deal possible. So let's see. I know there's some things about admin publishing deal. Like your other shows. Okay. So I don't see any questions in here. So if someone has a question, please post it in here, but I'll keep going. We're getting closer to 7:30. I want to make sure to leave time for questions that people may have been holding on to. So let's see. The last thing I'll say about sync is about sync agencies. Okay. So these are companies that will help you find sync deals. It's a lot of different ways this can work. And it's not a bad thing. It's like we want to get these sync deals, but I'm always very careful about the agencies we're working with, or at least understanding the terms of the deal, because some of these agencies want you to pay up front. Now, that may be an investment in a future return, or it may be money down the drain. So you want to do your research definitely before paying any significant money up front. And knowing, what this company's history is, do people like them? Have they gotten syncs out of them? There's also companies that you'll work with directly. So it's not just like signing up, but they actually send you a contract. So when we're looking at a contract with an agency or a company that is saying, I want to represent you and your songs or a song, let's pay attention to, are we granting that right exclusively or non-exclusively? In other words, if we get a deal, let's say we sign up with a sync agency and we grant them the exclusive right to sync our music. Well, that means any sync deal we get has to go through that agency. So we can't, if someone comes to us another way, that agency is still going to get their royalty. Is it terminable? So can we say, you know what, after 6 months, this isn't working out, we want to terminate. We're looking at these deal terms to make sure we know what we're getting into and thinking a few steps ahead about what happens if our music blows up or if this agency blows up or disappears, right? We want to make sure we're protected. So there is also a lot, whether it's one song or a whole catalog, or maybe it's for just an album, all those details matter in these agency deals. And we want to be clear about the ownership of the composition and the master, because a lot of these agency deals, they want the rights to both. They want to be able to say they've got the composition rights, they've got the sound recording rights, they can just go license it. which is fine if you own all the composition rights and sound recording rights. But if you've got co-writers or if you've got co-owners in those rights, we want to be sure we're thinking about everybody else who has to be involved, because if the contract you're signing with that sync agency were to say that you own all the rights, or you promise you have the power to grant these rights, we want to make sure you have the power to grant these rights. So, basically the thing with sync is it's a great opportunity to make money off your music, to get your music out there. It'll increase your performance royalties. It should increase your mechanical royalties, but we just want to be smart and calculate about it, be thinking through, know who we're working with, get the best deal that we can, make sure that we know where all the revenue is going to, so that it can be as lucrative as possible. So that is covering pretty much all the revenue streams. We've talked about, publishing and performance rights and mechanical rights, and I talked a little bit about print. Talked about the MLC. We talked about PROs. We talked about writer share and publisher share. But a quick recap. Okay, publishing means composition. We use those terms interchangeably. When someone says they have a percentage of publishing, it means they have a percentage of the ownership of the composition. You want to keep track of those rights, use split sheets, be clear with your co-writers about who's got what, and keep in mind all these different revenue streams. Just signing up for the PRO doesn't mean you're going to collect all your publishing revenue. Sign up with the MLC or sign up, get an admin deal so that someone's collecting that publishing revenue. There are admin deals that are open to all. Be careful of which one you're signing up for. Do your research. Google it and see what the reviews look like, because there are some that are much worse, I guess some that are much better than others. And that sync rights are certainly where it's at, or when it comes to revenue. So that is what I've prepared. But please pop some questions in the chat, because I would really, I'm sure there are other things out there. I know there's a bunch of things flying around. First question's from Omar. How important is it to register your songs with the actual Copyright Office? That is a great question. If you own the copyright as soon as pen leaves paper, is this step necessary, and why? The copyright registration is the legal proof of ownership. So the copyright registration is your ticket into court if anyone ever steals your music. If someone steals your music and you need to go sue them, you need to have a copyright registration. The other reason, or rather what comes along with a registration, is the right to what's called statutory damages. Damages is how much money we can collect when there is an infringement of our copyright. Statutory damages are up to $150,000 per infringing act. Without a copyright registration, you cannot collect those statutory damages. Your damages are limited to how much money you may have been paid if they had gotten a proper license. The other reason to have that copyright registration is because if someone is infringing your rights and you have to go after them and say, hey, cut it out, or you may have heard of what's called a cease and desist letter. A cease and desist letter is basically a letter saying, cease and desist from infringing my rights. Stop infringing, right? And if you write that cease and desist letter, you're saying, stop infringing or else. The or else is, or else I will sue you. So what has actually happened to me when I've contacted someone who's infringing and I've said, hey, cease and desist, cut it out, you're infringing, they will say, show me your copyright registration. Because if you don't have a copyright registration, you can't sue me, so I'm just going to keep on infringing. Or at least I'm just going to ignore you and not pay you anything. Registrations are not super expensive. The filing fee is only $65 to $85. You can register a group of songs together. There are special rules for that, so be very careful in how you group songs, because it's complicated. But basically, you can't just throw all the songs you ever wrote together into one registration. They won't allow that. The Copyright Office knows you don't want to pay $65 for every song, but you can, for example, register an album with one registration. So hopefully it's enough reasons to register your copyrights. I'm not saying you have to register every song you write. The advice I generally give my clients is we register a song once we're going to release it, because then it's out there and someone might steal it. Uh, and by the way, I should also mention, I love you all, but you're not my clients. Nothing I've said today is legal advice. It is simply information that I'm happy to share for the greater good. If you need legal advice, please contact a lawyer. My contact information is on the screen here, or you can contact CAFTA. So let's see. Miles was asking, even with an admin or publishing deal, you still have to collect your writer's share solo. Yes, that is true, but they will pay you automatically. You want that money. Uh, and that is what we call the mailbox money, is money that the PRO is just paying to you as a writer. You sign up with a writer's account and you will get paid for the rest, not only for the rest of your life, but for the lifetime of the copyright, which is 70 years after the death of the author. So yes, you will collect your writer's share. It is money that goes directly to you that no one takes a piece of, well, except the PRO. But even if you sign a publishing deal or an admin deal, you will still get your writer's share directly. Brandon, good music libraries to start with. I don't have any off the top of my head that I really want to recommend. I think it really does depend on the type of music and what we want to do with it. So I hesitate to say anything there. But D-Trade says I have a PRO question that will make more sense if I come off of mute. Okay. Hold on for that. We will let you come off of mute in just a minute. We have Christian asked a question. Any chance I know Matthew O'Brien? Yeah, I mean, there's some great folks at CUD, and I've guest taught at CUD. There's a lot of great music programs out there, and honestly, anyone who's sharing this information, I'm always a fan of. As long as the information they're sharing is correct, that is good information. I will also say that there's a lot of information out there on the internet. Yes, do your research, but check your sources. Okay, I've seen a lot of wrong or inaccurate data out there. In fact, I remember I was reviewing, there's a page on copyright on Wikipedia that was wrong a few years ago. So just be careful what you're trusting, verify, check with someone else or check multiple sites or whatever. I also will say that be careful of, there's a lot of contracts on the internet. A lot of people say, I don't want to hire a lawyer to write a contract. I'm going to write my own. That is fine. You don't have to have a contract. It does not have to be super complicated, but it does have to be correct. There are a lot of good contracts on the internet. There's a lot of terrible contracts on the internet. Be advised, be smart, be safe. You should always be smart and safe on the internet. That includes when you're researching music law. Omar asked, do PROs back pay if you register work after it's been released? Generally, no. At least not last time I checked. But the MLC does, Sound Exchange does. We're talking about Sound Exchange, I believe, next week, I think. In the future weeks, we were talking about Sound Exchange. They are holding on to your money, so come back for that. But yeah, that is, PROs are not always holding on to that money. There's a lot of different songs with the same name, so that gets confusing as well. I guess, I'd say, D-Trade, if you do want to come off of mute and turn on your mic, I'm happy to answer a quick question. We come up in 7:30, so we'll make it quick.
Sure. So, with regards to the PROs, and again, this is a general out there question, not you giving direct legal advice, so not holding your feet to the fire or anything like that. But what are your thoughts on someone registering with both PROs and only using one for certain things? So, like, for example, if I'm ASCAP, a featured artist is BMI, or vice versa, a lot of times you can't split publishing in that scenario. So does it make sense to register with one and only use it in those scenarios so you can match like for like?
So you can register, one song can be registered with both PROs. No problem with that at all. Very, very common. The trick, and I think where the crossover is, and I'm happy you brought this up, is that is for the writer's share. Okay. So a publishing company, if a publishing company, like a major publishing company, will have accounts at all the different PROs. Okay, because the publisher has to collect. If I'm a publishing company, I represent ASCAP writers. I represent BMI writers, I represent CSAC writers, so I'm collecting for all of them. Okay, so in that situation, as a publisher, you can sign up for multiple publishing accounts acting as the publisher. Now, if you are self-published, it's a little bit trickier. I think that if you are self-published and you are co-writing, you technically could create publisher's account at multiple PROs so you can collect for the other publishers, writers' shares. But generally, let's say you and I are co-writing a song together. We are both self-published. We're both collecting our own publisher share and our own writer's share. So if you are on ASCAP and I'm on BMI and we write a song together, I'm collecting my BMI writer's share and publisher share. You're collecting your ASCAP writer's share and publisher share.
So you would only take the 25. So I would take my 25 and 25, and you would take your 25 and 25, and that makes the 50-50 or the 100 and 100.
Yeah.
Got it.
So I'm happy you brought that up because that is a good trick. Or rather, it is a variation on a lot of things that I said. And so, yeah, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I think that I don't see any more questions in the chat. And I have done my best to answer as much as I could. I really appreciate everyone's participation today. I will be back for weeks 4 and 6. Max possibly back for weeks 3 and 5. So as we used to say in my generation, same bat time, same bat channel. Here 6 p.m. For the next 4 Mondays from 6 to 7:30. Thank you again. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to CAFTA or to Max. And I'll pass it back to Meredith.
I'll just say thank you and good night. And the recording will get posted later this week. And we hope to see you next Monday. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.